Tonight's story is The Shaman's Bell. Let's begin.
The bell came in a wooden box. Earth and rot, that's what it smelled like. Margot found it at the estate sale on Tuesday afternoon. It sat between moth-eaten linens and tarnished silver. The house had belonged to Dr. Helena Chen, an anthropologist. 40 years studying shamanic practices in rural Korea. Then she died alone in her study. Her body went undiscovered for 3 weeks. The realtor didn't mention that. But the neighbors did, their voices carried through open windows, eager and hushed. The bell itself was beautiful, bronze darkened to the color of dried blood. Characters she couldn't read covered its surface. It fit perfectly in her palm, surprisingly warm despite the autumn chill. She shook it once. The sound cut through the musty air, clear, bright, like a knife through silk. $50, the estate manager said. She barely looked up from her phone. Everything in that box is $50. Margot paid cash. She told herself it was for her dissertation. Material culture and memory, objects as historical witnesses. She was writing about how personal possessions carry traces of their owners' lives, how touching something someone else had touched created communion across time. The bell would make an excellent case study. She didn't tell herself the truth. The moment her fingers closed around bronze, something closed around her heart, a hook setting deep. The dreams started that night. In them, she was digging. Her hands moved independently of her will, clawing through dark earth in a forest she didn't recognize. Pine trees loomed overhead. Their branches created a canopy so thick no starlight penetrated. Her fingernails broke against stones and roots. But she couldn't stop. Something was buried here, something that needed to be found. When she finally unearthed it, always the same spot, always the same depth, it was the bell. But in the dreams, it wasn't bronze. It was bone, carved from a human femur. When she lifted it to her ear, she heard screaming inside. Thousands of voices, layered and discordant, all crying out in a language that bypassed her conscious mind. It spoke directly to something ancient in her brainstem. She woke at 3:47 a.m., her sheets soaked with sweat, the taste of soil in her mouth. The bell sat on her nightstand exactly where she'd left it. In the darkness of her apartment, it seemed to glow faintly, like dying embers. Margot reached for her phone, desperate for the blue light of normalcy. But her hand moved past it, her fingers closed around the bell instead. The metal was fever hot. She shook it once, twice, 3 times. The sound filled her studio apartment. It bounced off the exposed brick walls, amplifying until it seemed to come from inside her skull. Her heartbeat synchronized with it, her pulse matching its rhythm exactly. Then came the knocking. Not on her door, inside the walls. Margot froze. The bell still clutched in her hand. The knocking continued, moving along the perimeter of her apartment, methodical, searching. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. It circled the room like something walking just beyond the plaster, testing for weak points. When it reached the window, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Margot's apartment was on the 4th floor. There was nothing outside that window except a 4-story drop to the alley below. She forced herself to look. A woman's face pressed against the glass. Not standing on a fire escape or ladder, just there, suspended in midair. Her features flattened against the window, like she was trapped between 2 panes of glass. Her skin was the color of old parchment, her eyes milky with cataracts. But she was smiling. Her teeth were perfect, too white, too many. The woman's mouth moved, forming words Margot couldn't hear through the glass, but she could read lips well enough. Asterisk, let me in. Margot dropped the bell. It hit the hardwood floor with a sound like breaking bones. The woman vanished, just gone, as if she'd never been there at all. But when Margot checked her window in the morning light, there were handprints on the glass. Small hands like a child's, and they were on the inside. Margot called in sick to her teaching assistant position. She spent the day researching Dr. Helena Chen. The university library had 3 of Chen's books, all published by obscure academic presses, all focused on Korean shamanic traditions. Margot pulled them from the stacks. She spread them across a study desk. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the first volume, Asterisk Bells of the Dead, Material Culture in Korean Shamanism. Of course, Chen's writing was dense, overly academic, but certain passages stood out, passages that made her skin crawl. She described how shamanic bells, muryeong, were believed to contain the spiritual power of deceased shamans. When a shaman died, their bell was supposed to be buried with them, sealing their power in the earth. But some bells were deliberately hidden, left for the next generation to find. The bell chooses its bearer. Chen's words seemed to pulse on the page. The relationship is not consensual. Those who find a muryeong often report compulsions, dreams of digging, inexplicable knowledge of burial sites, overwhelming urges to perform rituals they've never learned. Margot's vision blurred. The words seemed to lift off the page, rearranging themselves into patterns that hurt to look at directly. The bell is not a tool. She kept reading, her heart hammering. It is a parasite, and the body it inhabits becomes a vessel for the accumulated power of all the shamans who carried it before. She flipped to the back of the book, looking for Chen's author photo. The woman staring back at her from the grainy black and white image was younger. Her hair still dark, but Margot recognized her immediately. It was the face from her window. The book slipped from her fingers. Around her, the library's fluorescent lights began to flicker. One by one, they died, darkness spreading outward from Margot's desk like an ink stain. The other students looked up from their laptops, confused, reaching for their phones as backup lights. But Margot's phone was ringing. Not the electronic trill of her ringtone, the actual physical ringing of a bell. She fumbled in her bag, her hands closing around the bronze. It was vibrating, hot enough to burn. But she couldn't let go. Her fingers had locked around it, tendons standing out like cables under her skin. The ringing grew louder. Louder. Students pressed their hands over their ears, their faces contorting in pain. Someone screamed. Someone else ran for the exit. Margot stood, the bell still clutched in her hand. She walked toward the library's back stairwell. She didn't choose to walk. Her legs moved independently, carrying her down concrete steps into the basement archives, where the oldest, most fragile materials were kept in climate-controlled darkness. The door should have been locked. It opened at her touch. The archives smelled like the wooden box, earth and rot, and something underneath, something sweet and wrong like jasmine trying to cover decay. Emergency lights provided the only illumination, casting everything in red. At the far end of the room, someone was waiting. Dr. Helena Chen stood between the shelves, exactly as she'd looked in the author photo, except her skin had the waxy quality of embalmed flesh. She wore a traditional hanbok, the silk embroidered with patterns that seemed to move in Margot's peripheral vision. In her hand, she held a bell identical to Margot's. "You found it quickly," Chen said. Her voice was dry, rustling like wind through dead leaves. "I buried it in the garden behind my house, wrapped it in oilcloth. Prayed you wouldn't come for years, but the bell is hungry, it's always hungry." Margot tried to speak, but her throat had closed. The bell in her hand was so hot now that she could smell her own flesh burning. But the pain felt distant, happening to someone else. "I was like you," Chen continued. She stepped closer. "An academic, rational. I thought I was studying a belief system, documenting a dying tradition. I didn't understand that some knowledge isn't meant to be observed. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed." She raised her own bell and shook it once. The sound was wrong. Too deep, resonating at a frequency that made Margot's teeth ache, made her vision swim. The emergency lights exploded in sequence, plunging them into absolute darkness. In the dark, Margot could hear them. Voices. Hundreds of them. Thousands. All speaking at once in Korean, in English, in languages she'd never heard. They weren't coming from the bell. They were coming from inside her own head, crowding into the space where her thoughts should be. Asterisk. "We are the lineage," they said. Asterisk, "We are the unbroken chain. We are the price of knowledge." "It starts with dreams," Chen's voice said from somewhere in the darkness. "Then compulsions. You'll perform rituals you've never learned, speak languages you've never studied. Your hands will move without your permission. Making mudras, drawing symbols, and slowly, so slowly you won't even notice, you'll disappear." Her voice grew closer, colder. "Not your body, that stays. But the person you were, the Margot who chose to study history, who had friends and family and a future, she'll be gone, replaced by something older, something that's been passed down through dozens of bodies, hundreds of years." The lights flickered back on. Chen was standing directly in front of her now, close enough that Margot could see the fine cracks in her skin, like porcelain about to shatter. But her eyes were alive, trapped and screaming behind the cataracts. "I tried to end it," Chen whispered. I buried the bell. I burned my research. I locked myself in my study and starved, thinking if I died, the chain would break. But I'm still here, aren't I? Still waiting, still watching. The bell doesn't let you die. It just makes you wish you could. She reached out, touched Margot's face with fingers that felt like dried twigs. There's only one way to be free, Chen said. Pass it on. Find someone else to carry it. Bury it where someone curious will dig. Leave it at an estate sale. Make it beautiful enough, mysterious enough, that some fool will pick it up, will think they've found treasure. Margot's hand was moving. Without her conscious will, her arm was rising, offering the bell to Chen like a gift. No, Chen said. She stepped back. Not to me. I already served my time. 40 years of my life feeding it. I found my replacement. Now you have to find yours. The voices in Margot's head crescendoed. A chorus of the damned. She could feel them now, pressing against the inside of her skull, trying to reshape her from within. Her lips moved, forming words in Korean she didn't know she knew. Asterisk mansion, muryeong shaman. The bell in her hand wasn't burning anymore. It was comfortable, natural, like it had always been there, like her hand had been made to hold it. How long? Margot managed to force the words out through the cacophony in her mind. How long do I have? Chen smiled. It was the saddest thing Margot had ever seen. You're already gone, she said. The moment you picked it up, you were gone. Everything else is just the bell learning to wear your skin. She turned, walked back between the shelves, her hanbok rustling. At the edge of the emergency lighting's reach, she paused. I'll be watching, Chen said. We all will, every shaman who ever carried that bell, trapped inside it, screaming. You'll hear us in your dreams. You'll feel us in your hands when they move without permission. And when you finally find someone to pass it to, someone young and curious and foolish enough to think they've found something precious, you'll understand what you've become. Her voice echoed in the darkness. Not a scholar, not a person, just another link in a chain made of suffering. She stepped into the darkness and was gone. Margot stood alone in the archives, the bell cooling in her hand. Above her, she could hear footsteps, security probably, investigating the power surge. She should call out, should ask for help. Instead, she slipped the bell into her bag, walked calmly toward the exit. The voices were quieter now, settling into the background of her consciousness like a second heartbeat. She could feel them exploring her memories, learning the shape of her thoughts. Soon they would start offering suggestions, subtle at first, take this route home, buy this food, talk to this person. And she would listen, because resisting would become harder each time. Until one day she wouldn't remember that resistance was even an option. Outside, the autumn sun was setting, painting the campus in shades of amber and rust. Students hurried past, laughing, arguing, living their ordinary lives. Margot watched them with something like nostalgia, mourning a normalcy she'd lost the moment her fingers closed around bronze in a dead woman's house. Her phone buzzed, a text from her advisor. Asterisk. Did you find anything interesting at that estate sale? Margot looked down at her hands. They were typing a response without her conscious input, her thumbs moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. Asterisk, yes, something perfect for my research. I can't wait to show you. She hit send before she could stop herself. Then she was walking, her legs carrying her toward the university museum, where her advisor kept office hours on Tuesday evenings. The bell was warm against her hip, pleased with her obedience. In her mind, the voices were singing. By the time she reached the museum's entrance, Margot had already composed the sales pitch. How the bell was a perfect example of material culture. How her advisor, Dr. Sarah Winters, specialist in East Asian art history, would love to examine it. How it would look beautiful on Sarah's desk. How its weight would feel so natural in Sarah's hand. How easy it would be to pass on. The door opened before she could knock. Sarah stood there, smiling, unsuspecting, one hand already reaching out in greeting. Margot, Sarah's voice was warm, welcoming. Come in, come in. You said you found something interesting. Margot's hand was already moving toward her bag, fingers closing around the bell. She could feel Chen watching from somewhere in the shadows, and behind Chen, all the others, a procession of the consumed, stretching back through centuries, each one waiting to see if this link would hold or break. The bell's surface was warm and smooth. When Margot pulled it from her bag, it caught the museum's track lighting, glowed like a living coal. Yes, she heard herself say, her voice steady and bright, completely unlike her own. I found something beautiful. Sarah's eyes widened with scholarly interest, her fingers already reaching out, eager and doomed. "May I?" she asked. Margot's smile felt wrong on her face. Too wide, using muscles she didn't remember having. But she held out the bell anyway, offering it like a gift, like a blessing, like a curse that had been passed down through generations of bodies that had once been people with names and dreams and futures. "Please," Margot said, "it's yours." And in the moment before Sarah's fingers touched bronze, in that last crystalline second of another life ending and another beginning, Margot felt something. Something that might have been relief, might have been despair. She couldn't tell anymore. The voices in her head were already receding, satisfied, their attention shifting to fresher meat. She would be free now, free to live what remained of her life, knowing exactly what she'd done, knowing that somewhere Sarah would be dreaming of digging, that Sarah's hands would soon move without permission, that Sarah would hear the screaming inside the bell and understand too late what treasure she'd accepted. The bell passed from Margot's hand to Sarah's. The museum's lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered. She turned it over in her palm, her eyes already glazing with the first touch of possession. "Where did you say you found it?" Margot walked toward the exit, each step lighter than the last, leaving Sarah behind with her prize and her doom. "At an estate sale," she called back, not turning around. Everything in the box was $50. The door closed behind her with a sound like a bell tolling. In the gathering darkness, Margot could still hear it ringing, not with her ears, but with something deeper, something that would never be fully silent again. She had served her time. Maybe 40 years, maybe 40 days. Time moves strangely when you shared your skull with the dead. But she was free now, free to live, free to remember, free to carry the knowledge of what she'd become and what she'd done. And to know that somewhere in the city, another woman was just beginning to understand, that her life had ended the moment her fingers closed around bronze. Margot stood on the museum steps, the cold autumn air on her face. Students passed her, laughing, talking, living. She envied them. Not for their ignorance. She'd been ignorant once. That hadn't saved her. She envied them their wholeness, the unbroken line between thought and action, between who they were and who they appeared to be. She would never have that again. The bell had taken it, had hollowed her out and worn her like a costume. And even though the voices were gone now, she could still feel the emptiness they'd left behind. A space in her mind that had been violated, reshaped, made into something other. She wondered if Sarah felt it yet. The first tendrils of something foreign in her thoughts, the first dreams of digging. She wondered how long Sarah would fight. Not long, probably. No one ever did. The chain remained unbroken. It always would.